I've designed AI systems for everything, from finance apps to marketing automations, and believe me, I kept running into the same problem, and that is unreliable outputs on the first times that you run an automation. Now, obviously that's bad because it corrupts the entire process of creating an AI system that is one, reliable, fast, and actually improves your business in a meaningful way. But the good news is that I found a way around it, and that is prompt puzzling. So in this video, I'll show you this prompting hack that solves everything and makes your AI reliable every single time. If you're new to the channel, my name is Matt Paiva. I build AI solutions for businesses, like I've said in the intro. And did you know that 3 out of 5 business owners are worried about trusting AI systems? And did you know that the main reason behind that worry is the fact that these AI systems are not always reliable? Well, I saw the statistics from a study from KPMG, and it actually surprised me because reliability is a very important part of AI systems, but it's also something that I've seen in my day-to-day. I've seen that every time that you create a new AI system and you do that first draft, that MVP, it never is what you actually expect. It always has problems that you need to solve. And a lot of those problems are around reliability. But before we dive deep into this discussion, how do we actually define reliability? Well, the way I define reliability in AI systems is the ability of that system to perform consistently well. And just based on that definition, we kind of run into a little bit of a problem because AI, the way we are looking at it right now, the way LLMs are structured right now, are inherently not deterministic, meaning that if you paste the same exact prompt 100 different times, you will probably get multiple different outputs. Now, this doesn't mean that the core of the output, if you're asking for a yes or a no, will be different every single time. But it means that it could say yes because this, yes since that, or whatever the alternative is. It will be a little bit different because the way these LLM systems work in the background kind of rely on that randomness and rely on that unpredictability a little bit. Now, our jobs as AI enthusiasts and people who are building AI systems is to turn those unpredictable outputs into predictable outputs, to turn those non-deterministic systems into deterministic systems. Now, doing that is very hard, but there are ways around it, and there are ways that we can accomplish this, and prompting is actually one of the main ways that we do this. Now, when I say prompting, I don't mean prompting in ChatGPT where you can go back and forth with the AI until you get the output that you want, because in an automation context, you don't have the luxury of going back and forth with the AI. In those types of contexts, you actually have to come up with a really good prompt that you know will work every single time. And will it work every single time? Well, it depends. It depends on the complexity of the problem and how you're actually structuring that prompt. Now, not surprisingly, when you're doing increasingly complex tasks with AI, the reliability can be expected to be lower, especially if you're not relying on very good prompting practices, let's call it that. So it is fair to say that if the complexity of the problem that you're trying to solve with AI goes up, the likelihood of that AI system going wrong and not being reliable also goes up. You can imagine, for example, that if you're asking AI to summarize an email, it will get it right most of the times. But if you're asking AI to come up with a full recipe for beef Wellington and you ask it 100 different times, the likelihood of that coming out exactly how you want it will be lower than just summarizing an email. And one of the most common solutions around complex problems is prompt chaining, which essentially just means connecting one prompt to the other and having each prompt do each step of the process. A prompt puzzle is a way of breaking down a complex problem that is not necessarily sequential into smaller pieces and then only pulling the pieces that you actually need for that specific prompt. So differently from a prompt chain relies on a sequence of steps that is always the same, or at least will be very similar every single time. Prompt puzzles will be a little bit different. They don't necessarily need to follow that step by step, but oftentimes they will include instructions of a step-by-step process because that's just good prompting practice. And they will just pull the information that we actually need for any given moment. So I was trying to come up with an analogy to make this a little bit more visual before we go into the actual use case that I was thinking about. And I thought about the analogy of putting together a pizza or making a pizza from scratch, right? If you're making pizza from scratch, you're going to need a prompt chain more often than not, especially for this pepperoni pizza. It would look something like this, right? You need to make the dough, add the sauce, add the cheese, add the pepperoni, and then you'll have this beautifully made pizza. Obviously, you need to put it in the oven and everything like that. But what if I followed this exact recipe? Would I get something that looked like this? Probably not, right? Because this is margherita pizza and it doesn't have pepperonis. Instead, it has basil and it has other things. And similarly enough, if I followed this exact step, would I get a pizza that looked like this? Probably not as well, because this is a pizza very common in Brazil, and it's called portuguesa, and it has eggs and olives in it. So my point here is that yes, more often than not, you will need the same base to build a pizza, but more often than not, you will need different ingredients for different types of pizza. So for our margarita pizza, you will also need basil over here. You need to make the dough regardless, you need to add the sauce regardless, you need to add the cheese regardless, and you also need to add basil instead of adding pepperoni. For this other type of pizza that I mentioned, you need to do the 3 steps that we mentioned before, plus the eggs, the olives, and the onions, and so on and so forth. You can understand that depending on the problem that you have in hand, you might need different ingredients to solve that problem. Now, I know that this example here is not super concrete for the business world, so why don't we talk about a specific example in the business world? Let's talk about a hypothetical marketing agency. By the way, if you don't want to build these systems for yourself, just reach out to me in the first link in the description below and book a call. You can book a free call with me or anyone in my team, and we can chat about building these AI systems for you. So let's imagine that this marketing agency is Margarita Digital, and Mario over here owns Margarita Digital, and they specialize in running meta ads. Now let's say that from one year to another year, Mario was running 50 campaigns per year roughly because he had around, let's say, 25 clients. And on the next year in 2026, he's now running 500 campaigns because Mario is so good at business that he 10x'd his company from one year to the other. Now, because Mario had such a huge amount of growth in such a small period of time, and here we're calling it 1 year, he had to train a bunch of new employees. So as Mario was hiring, he decided to create these SOPs to train the new staff on how to create ads like him and get the same amount of success that Mario had in the past. And in order to help people implement this SOP exactly how it was designed to be done, Mario decided to implement AI into this process. So he decided to ask someone to create a system that would audit the process that people were going through and making sure that they were following the SOPs when creating the meta ads. So that means that whenever someone finishes a meta ad, the AI will then review the process that they went through by double checking it against the SOP. And I know that this might not be super common for a specific, marketing agency type of scenario, but let's assume that you need to audit a process and match it against a specific type of criteria, right? And in this scenario, we're using meta ad campaigns. So how do you actually get this AI to look at this SOP and look at the process done to fulfill this meta ad campaign to make sure that the process was actually followed how Mario intended it to? Well, your first instinct might be to lay out and write down every single one of the steps in the SOP and turn it into a question. So you can turn that process into an audit. And then you're going to go and paste that question into the AI and then just ask it to review what was done before against this SOP. So then at the end of the day, that process might look something like this, where you have the meta campaign coming in and a prompt over here with 10 questions. And let's say that these questions can range from questions that ask if there is a clear call to action in the ad that was created, as well as if the ad falls under any restricted or sensitive categories like housing, credit, or jobs. Does it comply with Meta's policies? And at the end of the day, this AI here is responsible for interpreting all this information coming from Meta, matching it against this criteria, and coming up with a final answer as of yes or no to either approve or not approve that ad. So let's say, for example, Luigi over here was hired to create an engagement campaign for the new iPhone that was just launched this year. And Luigi goes ahead and does that process of creating that new iPhone. And when he's about to submit that new ad to get reviewed, to get approved or not, it goes through the AI. And then once Luigi sends it through the AI, he receives a no that says, no, Luigi, you haven't followed the process that we required you to follow. So Luigi's confused because he followed the SOP exactly how it was outlined. And when he's going to read that audit, he realizes that the answers that he's getting no, the things that he quote unquote didn't follow, are these. If this is a conversion or a traffic campaign, is tracking set up correctly? And the other no that he's getting is if ads fall under a restrictive or sensitive category, or in this case, does it comply with all the platform policies? And last but not least, if the campaign has a time-bound offer or event, is it scheduled correctly? So Luigi gets a no on all 3 of these answers, but reality is all of these are irrelevant for his type of campaign because he's performing an engagement type of campaign for the new iPhone, which is not a targeted, it's not a restrictive category under Facebook, and this will not be a time-bound campaign because as soon as it's launched, it doesn't have an end date. So obviously this makes Luigi frustrated because he did follow all the steps and actually none of these questions apply to him. So we know that we don't want this Luigi to be upset. So let's swap him out for the other Luigi before something bad happens. And in order to keep this Luigi happy and not turn into the other Luigi, we need to adapt the way this system is set up so we don't upset anyone else. And to be honest, this is not Luigi's fault. This is the fault of this entire answer is the way the system is set up because we're asking questions that are not relevant for this type of scenario. So how do we fix this? Well, obviously we need a prompt puzzle. We need a way to actually completely cross out these questions when we're asking questions about a different type of subject or a topic, a type of campaign that is not relevant for these questions. So how do you actually set up a prompt that has these pieces of information dynamically set? Well, you're going to need a database. But what does that database actually need? Well, it needs a couple of things. First things first, our audit template, or this is what the prompt puzzle actually is. The prompt puzzle will need the question, the instructions on how to answer that question, and the examples. Here under the instructions, you can include all sorts of things, including notes, SOPs, rules to answer questions, or however you want. I just like to split the instructions and the examples into two separate fields because sometimes I'm changing things here and then changing things there separately. You can also include another long text field over here for output template, and you can keep this always the same. But here, you know, the sky's the limit of how you want to structure it. What you really need is at least two fields, the question and the instructions. And ideally, by the way, you have this database set up or this table set up in the database that you have this thing that you're tracking for. So here, for example, we have a table for campaigns, which is set up just for the sake of the argument, where we have the campaign name, the client name, the campaign type, the copy, the budget, the audience, and the status of that campaign. So at the end of the day, you don't actually need a database. You just need a table to track all of this stuff. And by the way, this is Airtable. It is a free software, or they have a free version of the software, which allows up to 1,000 different records in here. You can get access for it like completely for free. I'll leave a link down below if that makes it a little bit easier. And honestly, it is a database software that I recommend to most business owners, just especially if they're using Google Sheets. If they need to transition from like Google Sheets or Excel to something else, Airtable is a very good next step. All right, so you have an idea that you're gonna have all of the things that you are tracking for, or the things that you want to track here in one table, in this scenario, the campaigns, and in another table, you'll need the audit. Here in each question, or in each row, you're going to include the question, the instructions on how to answer that, and the examples. So question number one, we know is there a clear call to action in the copy of the creative? And here, if we want to take a look at the instructions a little bit more closely, you will see that I included a purpose. I usually include a purpose for that question, or whatever the reason is that we're doing that. The instructions per se to answer that question. So here it would be read the copy carefully, identify if there is a direct command or phrase that instructs the audience to take an action. Do not count vague statements. And then if there is a CTA, output yes. And then if there isn't one, output no. And then here at the end, I just included a very short output format. And this is just like the most basic version of a prompt that you can possibly see, but you know, it's good to include these things here so you guys have a decent idea of what that looks like. And then in terms of examples, we always aim to include examples, both including pairs of inputs and outputs, because we know that AI works better when it has examples. And you know, this is called few shot prompting. If you are curious to take a look, go ahead and Google few shot prompting and you'll understand how this works in the background. So then once we have this entire table filled out, we want to do the following, right? We want to, one, make sure that we have a trigger type set up over here. And in this scenario, our trigger will be the status. So my idea was that when an ad goes from planning to review, and review would be right before it goes live, this would trigger an automation in the background, which is this. I'm going to get to that in a second. And once it goes to review, it triggers that automation in the background. And what will actually happen, and pretty much how we're going to determine what questions need to be asked, just like this example over here, how do we determine what questions need to be crossed out, are the views that we create. So here we have the main view where we have all the questions listed, all the instructions and all the examples. And obviously, like, I didn't include these other ones because this is just an example. And on the engagement one, I narrowed down from the 10 questions that we had to only 8 questions. And to be honest, I could even potentially take out this last question, but honestly, I'm not going to overcomplicate it. The idea is you create different types of views for different types of campaign. So you have a list of the exact type of questions that you need to be asked in that specific scenario. Now, this approach works really, really well if you have criteria for a location, for example. Actually, this is the scenario where I had the idea of building it like this. I had a client that had a specific set of criteria that they needed to match against whenever a property was on a given state. So let's say California, they had a list of questions for California. And if it was Florida, they had a list of questions for Florida. Some of those questions overlapped, but not all of them. Just like in the pizza example, you still needed dough, sauce, and cheese, but you might not necessarily need the pepperoni or the eggs or the basil and so on and so forth. So the base always kind of stayed the same, and I had the idea of creating these views that would adapt accordingly for each one of the states. And from here on out, you could always add new questions to each one of these views. So now that you have this view set up over here, how do you actually access it in the make.com automation? And by the way, I already said this is make.com. It is one of the simplest ways to start when it comes to create automations that will pretty much streamline your processes in the business. Zapier is another one, and Aiden is another one. I think Make is the simplest, and definitely if you're starting out and you don't have anything set up, go with Make. If you already have something set up, which could be the case for many of the people watching this video given the topic, just go with whatever you prefer. The idea here is that once you have your trigger, which in the scenario I just selected a search records, but it could be like whenever a record changes campaign type or campaign status, it would trigger something here, and then it would pull the specific ad that changed. So it would pull this specific role over here, right? So let's say we change this one from planning to review. As soon as we do this, it triggers make.com over here. And what will happen in the background is that we will pull this information, and then we will pull the audit questions based on the campaign type. So this means that the campaign type, the name of the view, needs to be exactly the same as the campaign type. That's exactly why over here, this is just called engagement and not engagement campaign, because the campaign type is called engagement. And the idea is that you have one of each for each type of campaign, or in that other example, for each type of state. And from there, you will see that when we run this, we get a total of 8 bundles instead of 10 bundles. Each bundle is each row. And then we can just use a text aggregator over here to put all the information into one string of text. And this allows us to use one single string of text to paste inside of a prompt in OpenAI over here, instead of running 8 different prompts asking one question at a time. Now from here on out, we can also create different routes. Let's say that 8 prompts or 8 questions in one single prompt is creating problems. You could do something along the lines of creating a filter where you can filter by bundles. So if you have a filter for the first 4 questions, and then you want to run one prompt for the first 4 questions and then another prompt for the later 4 questions, that's also totally possible. And it does happen. The more questions that you have on a single prompt, the higher the likelihood that that prompt will hallucinate, even if you're using the highest model available, which right now is GPT-5. It is also good to keep in mind that you need to strike a balance of amount of tokens that you're running per prompt and the amount of questions that you're asking per prompt. If you have a list of questions that is way too long, you're definitely not going to get the results that you want. But if you're just running one question per prompt, you might be pasting the information from the campaign over here over and over again, and this could increase the amount of tokens that you are pretty much intaking, or that OpenAI is intaking, and that you're spending with OpenAI. So obviously, like this example doesn't have a lot of things that we need to input in our scenario, but let's assume that the copy here is a couple thousands words long, which is obviously not the case for an ad, but maybe this is a translation or a transcription or whatever the case might be. That could get very high over time. Like the case I was working on, that I had the idea to create this, was an automation that was going to run over 25,000 times per month. So anything times 25,000 was going to be very high in terms of token usage. And then at the end of the day, when you do run this prompt, you are at a very good chance of getting the results that you want, because you're asking fewer questions per prompt that you're running. So this pretty much increases the reliability of the AI systems that you're creating and overall gets you much better results at the end of the day. All right, and that's all that I had for today. I hope that this video was valuable and that you learned a thing or two about prompt puzzling. If you don't want to build this entire thing for yourself, don't worry about it. I can do it for you. There is a link down below where you can book a free call with me and with my team so we can help you build the AI systems that you need in your business. There's also another link where you can get all of my AI templates for free, and I'll include for sure this template as well, so you can get access to all the information that I'm sharing over here on YouTube completely for free whenever you want. So that's all I had for today. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.